When the monk saw a girl praying, he kindly reminded her that she must live as a boy from now on because she had the rare and dangerous double king face. If she didn't, she would bring devastating misfortune to her family. The girl didn't believe the monk's warning. But not long after, her brother died from a mysterious illness. Racked with guilt for not listening, she decided to live on in her brother's identity, dressing as a man from then on. Her name was Ji. Elsewhere, under orders from the Phoenix King, a nobleman named Gaoshan was tasked with finding someone who had the face of a future queen. He searched all over Hanyang City but could not find a suitable woman. Just as he was about to give up, he suddenly saw, right on the street, a man who bore the exact face of a queen. By the time he realized what he had seen and sent people to pursue, the figure had already vanished. Gaoshan was perplexed. A person with the face of a queen should obviously be a woman, so why was it a man? In truth, he hadn't seen wrong at all. What he saw was actually Jihe, the governor's daughter disguised as a man. Coincidentally, the king soon held a palace gathering, summoning all noble sons to seek a worthy candidate. Disguised as her father's son, he had no choice but to attend. Perhaps it was fate. During the water-pouring ceremony, when Jihe's turn came, she grew nervous and accidentally toppled the great basin. Flustered and unsure what to do, she was recognized by Gaoshan. At last, he had found the one he was seeking. He glanced from the king's face to Ji's. Her radiant aura perfectly complemented what the king lacked. But the ceremony collapsed in chaos, the king flying into a rage. Terrified attendants scrambled, each fearing punishment. Amid the confusion, Jihe tried to slip away but accidentally collided with Guanghai. From a distance, Gaoshan caught sight of the two together, and saw that their features matched like heaven's own pairing. Later, Gaoshan confronted Ji. He warned her that if she didn't want the world to discover her disguise, she must come with him. Eager to win the king's favor, Gaoshan planned to present Jihe as the destined consort. But when Ji heard she bore the face of a royal concubine, she grew furious and accused him of spouting nonsense. Calmly, Gaoshan told her that her father was already in grave danger. Shocked, Jihe was left unsettled. Gaoshan was certain she would return to him eventually. Ji felt as if her long-held secret had been stripped bare. She remembered the monk's prophecy that she was destined to serve two kings. Heavy-hearted, she went to a tavern to drink, where she crossed paths with Guanghai. As they spoke, a pendant slipped from her clothing, marked with a star and earth pattern. Guanghai froze. It was the very pendant he had once given her. He remembered the day he had slipped away from the palace as a child, meeting Jihe at a temple. They had spent a day together roasting sweet potatoes and watching the stars. Before parting, he had gifted her the pendant, his secret token of love, promising that if he ever became king, he would marry her. For years, Guanghai had searched for the girl, never knowing she had lived as a man. Now, realizing that the youth before him was in fact the girl he had missed all this time, he was stunned. But fate was cruel. Because of her auspicious face, he was forced into the palace to serve the king. Before she could even be favored, she was handed over to the ruthless Lady Jean. Lady Jean sneered at Jihe's delicate youthfulness. "Still so fresh," she said coldly, before ordering her knocked unconscious, tied in a sack, and thrown out of the palace. Just then, Guanghai was returning. He saw the maids sneaking about with a sack. Noticing embroidered shoes peeking from the opening, he ordered them to stop. When the sack was opened and Ji's face appeared, his fury burned. The maids begged forgiveness, insisting they followed Lady Jin's command. Heart aching, Guanghai lifted Ji into his arms and carried her to his own quarters. When she awoke, he whispered, "It's not too late. We can still leave. Let's find a place where no one will ever find us, and live freely together." He was moved, but her parents, imprisoned and in danger, weighed heavily on her mind. She could not abandon them, and refused. But upon returning home, she was seized by royal guards. In the prison cart, Jihe finally learned the truth. The king had already ordered her father's execution. She and her mother were demoted to slaves. The king, after some thought, for the sake of the royal family's reputation, ordered Gaoshan to continue searching for a woman with the appearance of a queen. Hearing the news, Guanghai rushed on horseback to rescue Jihe, but he was still a step too late. The carriage was empty, the guard responsible had died, and Jiehe's whereabouts were unknown. Only a pendant remained on the ground. Devastated, Guanghai angrily confronted his father, demanding loudly why, even as a king, he was still so fearful. How could he believe the throne's stability depended on appearances? For the first time since birth, Guanghai directly clashed with his father, fully prepared to be killed. In a rage, the king drew his sword to finish him, but in the end, he struck it into the ground instead. He warned Guanghai to keep the sword safe. Someday, he must either use it to kill himself or to kill the king and claim the throne. "This is your fate," the king said, "because you were born with the face of a king." As soon as his words ended, thunder rolled, lightning flashed, and heavy rain poured down, bringing joy to the people who had long awaited rain. 3 years passed in the blink of an eye. The king once again filled the harem with women that Gao Shan found to remedy his unlucky appearance. Even Lady Jing, from afar, was shocked by how many women kept being brought in. Though deeply resentful, she was powerless to stop it. Meanwhile, in the forest, Guanghai was out hunting, unaware he had already been targeted. The would-be assassin couldn't bring herself to kill Guanghai, and instead turned her sword on Guanghai's younger brother, Xinxiang. Hearing cries for help, the king arrived with guards. Stabbed and bleeding, Xinxiang insisted it was Guanghai who attacked him, since only the two of them had been present. Guanghai was shocked by Xinxiang's accusation and told the king there had been a third person, wearing a hat, who had not yet escaped the mountains. The king immediately ordered the guards to search the forest. Meanwhile, hiding behind a rock, Jihe narrowly avoided the guards, only to find a wolf staring at her. Though she had evaded capture, the wolf attacked fiercely. Terrified, Jihe retreated, then turned and fled, the wolf chasing closely. Forced to fight, she drew her bow, but the arrow missed. The wolf bit her arm before finally being killed. Hearing its cry, guards rushed over but found only the dead wolf and a red bamboo arrow, proof a third person had indeed been present. The king, however, ordered the guards to keep this secret. Though he knew Guanghai was innocent, he told him no third person had been found, and that he must be the one who stabbed Xinxiang. Guanghai was thrown into prison to await punishment. Though many ministers petitioned, and the king wished to kill Guanghai immediately, he instead announced that Guanghai would have 5 days to find the true assailant, though in truth, he already planned to use another excuse to dispose of him. Unaware, Guanghai searched tirelessly for the culprit. When he finally discovered the truth, he was stunned. The attacker was none other than Jihe, the person he had longed for over the years. 3 years earlier, Jihe had suddenly vanished. Guanghai thought she had died, yet here she was alive before him. Overcome with emotion, he called out Jihe's name again and again. But Yi, hiding in the shadows, though pained, remembered the deaths of her parents. Hatred for Guanghai filled her heart, and she knew her destiny was revenge. Since Jihe was the one who stabbed his brother, Guanghai could not reveal the truth. This meant he would be condemned as the scapegoat. Despite pleas from ministers and the queen, the king decreed Guanghai's banishment from the palace. As he left, Guanghai was met with scorn from the people, pelted with stones and spat upon. How could the crown prince attack his own brother? He, standing among the crowd, coldly watched it all. Meanwhile, the king, who had once believed his throne secure, was shaken awake by news that the woman meant to remedy his unlucky appearance had vanished. Fear once again gnawed at him. Banished and accused, Guanghai still worried about Yi. He believed his father would not let things rest and would continue the investigation. So he ordered his men to find Jihe and warn her to stay hidden. But it was still too late. By then, the city walls were already plastered with portraits of Jihe. Disguised in men's clothing, she appeared on horseback in the city. Guanghai mounted his horse alone and followed. Sure enough, he saw Jihe being chased by a group of men in black. Leaping off his horse, Guanghai fought the men fiercely, finally rescuing the wounded Jihe. He had barely brought her back home when the king himself arrived at Guanghai's residence. There, he discovered Jihe hiding inside. At the sight of her familiar face, a memory returned to him. In the palace, one of the concubines, desperate to keep her place in the harem, had once stripped down to a thin robe before the court, kneeling in front of the throne. She confessed her faults and begged the king to cast her out of the palace. The king, shocked, listened in silence. It was Lady Jing who spoke next, delivering words that struck the king's heart. She revealed that during the hunt, it had not been Crown Prince Guanghai who stabbed Prince Xinxiang, but her own elder brother, Kim Gongriang. He had only been aiming for a wild boar, but his strike went astray and accidentally hit the prince. The ministers present were astonished. The king himself had only just banished Guanghai from the palace, yet now Lady Jing had publicly overturned the accusation. What kind of man could make the proud and untouchable Lady Jing humble herself so much? The truth was that Guanghai, having learned he had been framed, had deliberately laid a trap for her brother. As expected, Kim Gongriang fell for it and revealed his secret account book of bribes. Having failed, he could only turn to his sister for help. Realizing her brother had been outmaneuvered by Guanghai, Lady Jing was furious, but she could do nothing. With no other choice, she lowered her head and sought out Guanghai, asking him what he wanted. But Guanghai only told her he desired one thing: the truth. Meanwhile, the king returned again to Guanghai's residence and once more discovered Ji. At first, he did not recognize her as the very woman Gao Shan had once presented to him as someone whose presence could remedy his unlucky appearance. But an attendant nearby did recognize her, though he chose not to expose her identity on the spot. At the same time, the king arranged for Lord Yu's daughter to be betrothed to Guanghai. When Ji heard this, she urged him to accept the marriage. The two had made a promise of marriage when they were only 8 years old, but now Ji encouraged him to allow another woman to take her place so that he might quickly regain his position as crown prince. Guanghai knew the cost of regaining his title: he would lose the woman he loved. And this was exactly what the king wished to see. On the wedding day, Ji herself was asked to prepare Lady Yu's makeup. Though her heart ached, she forced herself to smile. As Guanghai, the groom, bowed with Lady Yu under the blessings of the crowd, Ji, hidden among the people, could no longer bear it and fled in tears. Lady Yu, watching Guanghai drink the wedding wine, knew he had been forced to marry her. Yet she herself had already grown fond of him, and she begged her father to one day help Guanghai in his struggles. As Ji left the palace, she sheltered from the rain beneath the eaves. Her pendant slipped from her cloak and fell to the ground. The king, arriving just then, picked it up before she could. When he handed it back to her, he recognized her face. It was the same woman he had once glimpsed at Guanghai's residence. From his birth, Guanghai had endured the monk's daily ritual of piercing his skin with 9,981 needles. Whenever he faltered, Gao Shan would remind him that it was the king's order. Though he was already handsome, why must he suffer such torment? Later he learned the truth. His father wished to mar his face, for Guanghai had been born with the visage of a true emperor, while the king himself bore only the features of poverty. To compensate, the king sought a woman with the destined face of a queen to enter the harem. No one could have imagined that this woman would turn out to be his own son's beloved. When Gao Shan reported this to him, the king finally realized why Jie had seemed so familiar. He had already seen her once in Guanghai's residence. Yet knowing full well that Guanghai loved her, the king still ordered her summoned and prepared to install her in the palace as one of his consorts. Unwilling to enter the palace, he sought out the queen and begged to be sent away instead. But the queen, who had once defied the king 3 years before, now found herself powerless. Seeing Ji again after 3 years, she could only sigh. It must be fate. I must ask you now, the queen said, fearing what he might do. For Ji, unwilling to surrender, would rather die than be given to the king. Alarmed, the queen ordered that Ji be confined until the day she was presented before the king. Ji thought this time she could not escape her fate. But just then, word arrived. The front lines were in crisis, and within 3 days enemy forces would reach Hanyang. At that moment, the king once again blamed his own face. Was the war happening because he bore such a wretched, impoverished appearance? In despair, he wiped away his tears, fled the palace with his concubines, and abandoned the city. Only Guanghai remained behind to guard the gates. The vast palace stood nearly empty, with just Guanghai, a few loyal ministers, and 8 guards the king had left behind. But even the guards, fearing death, busied themselves with stealing valuables to take and run. With no other choice, Guanghai rallied the strong men of the city. Through sheer will and determination, never abandoning nor giving up, the prince's forces grew larger. Not only did they repel the invaders, but they even recaptured lost territory. When news reached the king that Guanghai had completely driven out the enemy, he returned in triumph with his concubines. Yet his prestige among the people was gone. Hoping to reclaim his reputation, he hosted a lavish banquet, inviting the common folk to feast. But no one came. At last, a group did arrive, but only to thank Crown Prince Guanghai. The king's jealousy and bitterness swelled once more, and he resolved to depose his own son. In the palace, a former maid had risen to become the king's favored consort. Lady Kim, unwilling to yield her power, clashed with Ji. When Jae-hee warned her that she was no longer the servant girl she could once bully, Lady Kim flew into a rage and ordered her attendants to drag Jae-hee out. Before they could act, the queen herself entered. Lady Kim hurried to speak first, hoping to play the victim. But to her shock, the queen scolded her instead and defended Ji. "Be careful with your words," the queen warned. "If you will not leave, I will have you dragged out instead." Humiliated, Lady Kim stormed away like an offended peacock. What she did not know was that Ji-hee had been deliberately placed at the king's side by the queen herself. The queen, though always protective of Guanghai, knew her health was failing. To shield him from the king's growing jealousy, she sought someone who could stand in the palace to protect him. That person was Jae-hee. At first, Jae-hee refused outright. She still loved Guanghai and would not betray him by entering the harem. But the queen pleaded, reminding her that only by doing so could the people know peace, and only then could Guanghai avoid being accused of treason and stripped of his title. Helpless, Jae-hee agreed. The queen personally informed the king that she had found the woman whose presence would remedy his unlucky appearance. Hearing this, the king was overjoyed. With he believed the kingdom's fortune would flourish. Even in the midst of rebellion, the king could not forget Ji. Dressing himself carefully, he came to her residence. Yet Jae-hee refused his advances. Instead, she offered a condition: she would help him gain glory and alter his ill-fated image. Fooled by her words, the king slept peacefully, while Ji-hee watched over him the entire night. The next morning, Guanghai came to visit. Seeing Ji inside the king's quarters, he was struck with disbelief. Staggering out, he heard the sounds of music and laughter within, his heart torn apart. Overcome, he collapsed unconscious. Beside him, his loyal attendant heard him call Jae-hee's name again and again. Never had she seen him so distraught. From the queen's lips, she finally learned the truth. She recalled the sight of Guanghai at his wedding feast, drinking the nuptial wine with hollow eyes. She realized then he had long ago given his heart to another. All her hopes of entering his heart had been in vain. Moved by pity, the queen's attendant at last told him everything. Jae-hee entered the palace only to protect you. The queen's death grieved the king deeply. For Jae-hee, it left her without a protector, surrounded on all sides by enemies. Lady Kim, ruthless as ever, seized her chance. She prepared sweet cakes and presented them to the king, who, finding the taste pleasing, also offered some to Ji, never noticing the triumphant glint in Lady Kim's eyes. By then, he had been in the palace for 5 years. The king allowed Ji nothing more than reading books, never involving her in palace affairs. This stirred envy among the women of the harem. Ruthless Lady Kim grew bolder, even using the king's own hand to give Jae-hee tainted cakes. Unaware, he fell gravely ill that very night, thinking she had simply eaten something bad. The king, in disarray, rushed to her chambers with his clothes half-dressed, worried beyond measure, never realizing it was all Lady Kim's scheme. When Guanghai heard of Jae-hee's illness, his face betrayed his deep concern. Soon after, he received a letter, supposedly from her, asking to meet in the library at night. But when Jae-hee arrived to fetch a book, Guanghai suddenly appeared, startling her. Only then did they realize neither had written the letter. They had walked straight into a trap. At that very moment, the king appeared outside the door, watching the two of them together, his heart a storm of mixed emotions. Terrified, knelt in the great hall, unable to read the king's expression. He saw through her lies at once but chose not to expose her. Instead, he resolved to seek a new queen consort, guided by fortune-tellers reading faces. After much selection, he chose the daughter of Lord Kim. Upon entering the palace, she quickly learned that Ji was the king's favorite and moved to put her in her place. She demanded to know why Ji had not come daily to pay respects. Then, ordering branches to be brought, she had Ji's legs beaten mercilessly. Ji endured without a sound, which only fueled the queen's hatred. Only when the crown princess interceded on Ji's behalf, invoking the king's name, did the queen relent. Outwardly calm, she was inwardly furious, and from that day schemed constantly to undermine Guanghai. When she bore the king a legitimate son, her ambition grew further. She wished to place her child on the throne. At last, she found her chance. Forging letters between Guanghai and the Kim family, she delivered them to the king. Suspicious and insecure, the king believed the letters as proof of treason. He ordered Guanghai arrested and watched as ministers loyal to him were tortured. Learning of this, Ji hurried to the crown prince's residence, intent on destroying the false letters before the guards could find them. But just as she left, palace soldiers spotted her and reported everything to the king. This only deepened his conviction that Guanghai meant rebellion, and he resolved to strip him of his title. He, unwilling to see him fall, sacrificed everything to protect his position. Yet in the end, it seemed all was for nothing. Refusing to accept defeat, she prepared the king's favorite delicacies, simple cakes, carefully made, served with a cup of cardamom tea. Carrying the tray, she went to his chambers as if to admit her faults. The king, delighted by her gesture, ate without suspicion. But as he left the hall to announce Guanghai's deposition, his steps faltered. Mid-sentence, he collapsed to the ground, just as the bitter taste of Yi's tea returned to his mind. But it was already too late. She no longer had the chance to speak. Elsewhere, Yi held in her hand the pendant Guanghai had given her when they were children. Memories of their youth flickered before her eyes as vividly as if they had happened yesterday. She chose silence, bearing the burden to protect Guanghai's path to the throne. She believed wholeheartedly that he would become a wise and just ruler. With that faith, she collapsed to the ground. Meanwhile, the Queen Dowager waited eagerly, convinced that with Guanghai deposed, her own son would inherit the title of crown prince. But instead of good news, word reached her that the king had suddenly fallen ill. When courtiers rushed to the grand hall, they found the king already gone. Even the royal physicians could do nothing. Guanghai was stunned. His father, a man who had always seemed cold and unshakable, had left the world without warning. At that moment, Lady Sayabai suddenly realized Ji was nowhere to be seen. When she hurried to Ji's quarters, she found her collapsed on the floor beside a cup of cardamom tea. Only then did she understand the truth. Everything had been Ji's doing. The king's sudden death threw the palace into chaos. Every faction schemed for its own advantage. The Queen Dowager secretly summoned her father, Lord Kim, ordering him to seize the royal seal and prepare for her son's claim to the throne. But before they could act, Guanghai presented the forged letters, the very evidence that Queen Dowager and Lady Kim had conspired to frame him. Hearing that Guanghai intended to make the letters public, the Queen Dowager wavered. Yet when she realized he bore no desire to punish her, she abandoned her claim, no longer resisting his rise. Lady Kim, too, understood her position was lost. With even the Queen Dowager giving up, she had no hope of securing the crown for her son. Thus, Guanghai ascended the throne without opposition. But then came the bitter revelation. His father's death had been caused by Ji. To secure his crown, she had poisoned the king. Yet she had spared him from true cruelty, only drinking the tea herself, leaving the cakes untouched. The dose she consumed did not take her life, but it stole her voice. She could no longer speak her love nor defend her choices. Guanghai saw it as the price of fate. Though anger and sorrow tore at him, he could not bring himself to kill her. Instead, he chose mercy, ordering that she be sent away, never to appear before him again. With that, the story comes to an end. Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe and drop a heart if you love the series.